Thank you very much, Will. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making a space for this session today, and welcome to the first Imagine Adaptation public webinar. Today, we'd like to share what we've been working on over the past 3 years and also what we plan to work on in the next 2. And we would like to hear your feedback, both on what we did and what we plan to do. So, very excited about this session. A few quick housekeeping notes before you start. We wanted to explain that we have organized this session as a webinar, which it's not very good for engaging, but because of the number of people, we thought that it was going to be better. For this reason, the first part of the session will be 45 minutes of presentations, and we will have then plenty of time for questions and discussion. Through the presentation and also afterwards, if you want, please type your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be responding to them either in writing or out loud, depending on the question. And also, if your question is for a specific person, please, we would really appreciate if you could include their name. So, it will be very helpful to facilitate the conversation. The chat on the right that you can open on the right is just for general hellos and goodbyes, as I see that is happening now, and for informal comments. But for any questions, please use the Q&A space that you will find at the bottom of the screen. So, and because of this webinar format, all cameras and microphones are disabled for participants. So I think that with this, we can start. And who am I? My name is Marta Olazábal. I'm the principal investigator and the coordinator of the project Imagine Adaptation. And this project is funded by the European Research Council, the ERC. It started in 2023 and it will finish in 2027. And with one very recent addition to the team this year, we are a team of 7 people, and you will hear from most of them today. And maybe you already know them, right? So we have Maria Loroño, Ana Terra Amorim Maya, Son Goodwin, and Cecilia Alda Vidal, who are postdocs in our team. They lead research on several topics throughout the project, and that they will have the opportunity to share today. And they also lead case study work with local partners. William Lewis is the project manager and comms person in our project. And both Will and also Aitana Lopez, who has very recently joined the team this year, are working on their PhD research, also leading important topics for us that originally we were not hoping to work on, but have resulted to be key in our project. So as you see in this next slide, many other people are also collaborating with us, either through direct contributions to our scientific work or through an advisory process that also includes the ethics of the project that we found to be very important as we work with local partners. Without our collaborators, many key parts of our research could not have been properly developed. And for this reason, this space is a perfect opportunity to thank them for their time and support over the past 3 years, and hope that we can keep the engagement in the future. So, now comes the heart of this presentation. What is Imagine Adaptation? And we started with one question, right? The title of this presentation: should we, how do we imagine adaptation? So from the beginning, these are foundational questions of our project. The main goal of Imagine Adaptation is to advance pioneering science, policy and practice for the evaluation of urban climate change adaptation. Many of you today know this work and know that this is a challenge, evaluating adaptation. But particularly, the question is, why connect evaluation with imagination? We believe, and we've realized through this project, that we can only evaluate adaptation if we first are able to understand, if we first are able to imagine what good adaptation really means. You know that adaptation is contextual, but it's also compounded and is not universal. So working with local actors, dealing with adaptation on the front line is key to understand what works and why and how we can learn from that. So, and also throughout this project, we've realized that climate change adaptation evaluation practices must, if we follow this idea, identify context-specific adaptation goals that make sense for everyone. And it's because of this reason that we believe that adaptation goals are then, they turn into the ways to imagine adaptation in our cities. However, and this is the challenge, many times our imagination or our conception of what adaptation can be or should be feels somehow limited. Through the work of this project, we found that these limitations are due to three very specific reasons. First, there is a general belief in universal problems and solutions. And for example, even if we are experiencing a heat wave in Lima or in London, the implications and the solutions required in order to address this heat wave are not the same. Adaptation cannot be the same. We cannot treat adaptation processes in the same way. Second, we often do not sufficiently consider different values and different ways of knowing, different knowledges when making adaptation decisions or when evaluating the effectiveness of adaptation measures, what works and what does not work. So far, you know, and I'm sure that you have experienced how technical knowledge has been dominant when we think of ways to adapt and also when we think of success and of failure. Well, local knowledge and experience are also key to conceiving adaptations that are both effective and sustainable in time. And in this project, we've seen and we are experiencing how people on the ground are the ones that know best what works and what has not worked, and also why, which is important for learning. And finally, the third point is that we tend to simplify the adaptation challenge. And this is unfortunate, yes, because adaptation is here to stay. Adaptation is not about silver bullet solutions, because some adaptations may work for some time, but new challenges will emerge because our environment is changing, our climate is changing, because also cities are in constant change. Because of this reason, testing, experimenting, evaluating, and learning are crucial and critical to find what works. So you also know that this community, adaptation scientists, practitioners, policymakers, people on the front lines have been studying and practicing adaptation for a very long time now. 30 years of adaptation research and practice have shown that adaptation imaginaries must move beyond hazard and risk reduction ideas, because adaptation is much more. And now Ana Terra will explain a little bit more about this work that we've been doing on this front.
Thank you, Marta. Yes, so the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, defines adaptation as the adjustments to actual or expected climate and its effects. But this definition raises a simple and yet important question. How do we know if or when adaptation is actually working? The way that we think about adaptation shapes how cities plan, what gets implemented, and how progress is assessed. Today, adaptation is often judged by whether predefined targets are met, but this often overlooks who defined these targets, whose knowledge informs them, and whether they respond to people's actual needs. So as a result, attention often focuses on technical solutions, on short-term results, and those things that are easiest to measure. This can, in turn, miss very important social and political aspects of adaptation and limits its potential to create meaningful, long-lasting change. So our work explores how we can broaden this view and better capture what adaptation success really looks like on the ground. Over the past 3 decades, as Marta was saying, the way that we think about adaptation has changed significantly. So we've had more frequent climate impacts, growing social inequalities, and repeated experiences with the limits of technical solutions. And this has all shown us that adaptation is much more than simply reducing risk. At the same time, experience from practice and new ways of working across disciplines and changes in governance, they have all broadened how adaptation is currently understood. So in this study that we recently published in Global Environmental Change, we interviewed 50 world-leading adaptation practitioners and researchers to understand how adaptation thinking has evolved over the decades. And what we learned is that risk reduction alone is not enough, that adaptation is very political, is relational, and that it needs to be connected to wider development goals, while at the same time acknowledging that adaptation has its own limits. So in response, we propose a new framework for adaptation. And with that framework, we don't want to offer a new fixed definition, but we want to help people think through adaptation as an evolving process that brings together risk reduction, human development, and equity in order to support people's ability to live well in a changing climate. And collectively imagining adaptation helps connect today's decisions with the futures that we want to move towards. It creates space for different voices, experiences, and forms of knowledge to be heard. Adaptation is not something that happens in isolation. It is, as I said before, deeply relational. That means that it's shaped by people, how they relate to each other, to institutions, and to places. So this is why shared imagination and collective reflection are so important for learning, for collaboration, and for meaningful change. So now William Lewis will elaborate on the potential of urban adaptation imaginaries.
Thank you, Anna. So conversations about the future or future climate change often focus on visible impacts such as heat waves, floods, or droughts. However, planning for the future requires imagining how cities, homes, and our daily lives may change even decades from now. So in this paper, published now in Urban Studies, we propose linking urban adaptation imaginaries to future visioning processes because they can help support these conversations and better include social, political, and cultural realities rooted in lived experiences. So we identify a number of challenges to futures thinking, such as the current limits to imagination and the exclusion of vulnerable groups, and often a lack of opportunities for experimentation. And we argue that imaginaries can help address these challenges by emphasizing learning, by creating a space for reflection, context by grounding ideas in local realities, and justice by ensuring inclusive and equitable processes. And so through our research, we also found that creative tools like storytelling or participatory mapping or arts-based workshops can also help communities better explore these imagined futures. So in this paper, published in Nature Communications, we explore how art-science collaborations can support conversations about adaptation to be localized and more specific to local needs and different priorities. So then this in turn kind of complements the processes of target and goal setting and allows for the development of local ideas and understandings of what good adaptation should look like. So as we can see, urban adaptation imaginaries are very diverse and there are many different ways of knowing. And so this means that excluding local and traditional perspectives may lead to ineffective solutions or even undermine the legitimacy of adaptation interventions. So for this reason, adaptation needs to be inclusive and a negotiated process that enables communities to co-create adaptation goals. So by engaging with all of these plural voices, this can help ensure adaptation strategies respond to local realities and social and political processes rather than imposing top-down solutions. And Maria is now going to explain a bit more about our work on this.
Yes, thank you, Will. So our work on this topic was recently published in Nature Cities. And in this study, we explore how urban climate adaptation is imagined differently around the world. So rather than treating adaptation as a single technical solution, we saw that people have diverse views of what adaptation is, and these views are shaped by their local context and their values. And in our research, we involved 79 local adaptation actors from 37 different countries. And in order to help participants imagine alternative futures, which is not easy, we used 31 illustrations showing different ways that cities can adapt to climate change. And these visuals were the product of a lot of research to gather concepts reflecting both adaptation outcomes and processes. And then the illustrations were designed in collaboration with an artist. So through this work, we identified 4 competing urban adaptation imaginaries. The first one we called Green Utopia, showing that nature-based solutions are the ultimate way to adapt to climate change. The second one is Sustainable Lifestyles, with a focus on building retrofitting and circularity. The third one is Climate Preparedness, which prioritizes readiness and local collective effort. And the last one is top-down and technology-driven, prioritizing expert-led and technology-focused adaptation. So overall, the study highlights that there is no single vision of adaptation, and that some imaginaries reinforce dominant paradigms while others challenge them. One of the most interesting reflections from this work was the potential that creative methods have in climate research. What we saw is that using illustrations helped people's imagination and also discover deeper understandings of adaptation that words alone can miss. And more generally, in Imagine Adaptation, we are using these illustrations to encourage dialogue between different actors, and the feedback so far has been really positive. So in order to make this accessible, we've compiled the illustrations into a pack that is open access and is freely available for anyone to download and use. And this pack includes the illustrations themselves, short explanations for each illustration, also guidance on how to use them, and also a brief survey at the end, so to help us a little bit understand how the illustrations and how this pack is being used and what benefits people that are using this pack are observing. So you can access the pack using the QR code that appears on the screen right now. Using illustrations allows the discovery of local views and also allows understanding day-to-day experiences. Many adaptation initiatives are already taking place at the local level and from the bottom up, which is known as everyday adaptations, a concept that Cecilia is now going to talk about.
Thank you, Maria. So everyday adaptations refer to the small changes that people make to adjust their lives to climate change. For example, helping an older neighbor during heat waves, shifting routines to avoid the hottest part of the day, or placing barriers to block floods. Despite being widespread, these actions remain largely invisible in global climate debates, including those led by the IPCC. These debates tend to prioritize large, planned, and expert-driven solutions, such as infrastructure projects or formal policies. To address this gap, we conducted a study that has recently been published in Global Environmental Change. We reviewed over 40 studies from cities in 28 countries and identified more than 600 examples of everyday adaptations. One interesting thing we found is that when traditional categories are used to classify adaptation actions, a lot of what people actually do on the ground gets overlooked. Terms like behavioral and technical adaptation are often too rigid and don't reflect the real diversity of these responses. So we created a classification with 16 categories to highlight overlooked forms of adaptation. Our intention was not to create new categories for their own sake, but to make these diverse practices visible, because when actions are unnamed, they remain unseen and unsupported. These new categories include, among others, nature-based and nature-centered practices like leaving food and water for animals during heat waves, practice based on relationships and networks, such as participating in mutual aid networks after floods, social and community action, like volunteering in community gardens, political action, such as standing for election, and psychological, emotional, and spiritual practices, like practicing meditation or praying. What these categories tell us is that adaptation is not always about technical or rational responses. We saw that everyday adaptation is often grounded in care, cooperation, and collective everyday survival. We believe that effective climate adaptation requires broadening what counts as adaptation and valuing everyday actions, lived experience, and local knowledge alongside planned strategies. Broadening definitions of adaptation brings new challenges for monitoring and evaluation. These challenges reflect deeper and long-standing tensions over how success is defined and measured, and by whom. We should not forget that because adaptation is not only a technical process, but also a social and political one, evaluating adaptation is also about much more than just numbers. I now pass it on to Sean, who will tell you more about this.
Thank you, Cecilia. As the team has already mentioned, I hope you get by now that we think that adapting cities to climate change is about more than just building things. It is about learning what works, for whom, and why. For example, in our review of post-2016 literature that's published in Environmental Science and Policy, we find that monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning, or MERL, is where disagreements over the meaning of adaptation, whose knowledge counts, and what success looks like are negotiated in practice. These challenges extend well beyond technical concerns and include things like power, values, fairness, resource constraints, and uncertainty across both time and space. After surveying around 150 MERL practitioners across the world, which will be published later in the year, we found contrasting perspectives on these challenges and their potential solutions. Practitioners are not so uncertain about how to do MERL, but are instead taking pragmatic approaches that combine different kinds of data, experiences, and multiple forms of knowledge through both bottom-up and top-down processes. To address current challenges, they emphasize understanding local context, building skills and capacity, strengthening collaboration, and engaging in advocacy. But looking ahead, practitioners told us they expect that finance, capacity building, and new technology like AI will grow in importance, while, somewhat concerningly, locally grounded knowledge appears to become less of a priority. This uncertain future of MERL practice raises an important question. Do we currently have the right tools to measure urban adaptation? Our recent research suggests not yet. Based on an analysis of 901 indicators and metrics that are currently being used to evaluate urban adaptation, we find that most of these are weakly connected to real decision-making or long-term change because they focus on short-term actions and outputs. Our earlier work looking into 750 indicators being used to evaluate urban nature-based solutions shows similar patterns, with measurement often prioritizing ecological indicators over social equity and governance outcomes that matter locally. Without better, more grounded measurement tools, MERL will continue to struggle to support learning, accountability, and truly transformative urban adaptation. Taken together, our findings suggest a gap between how adaptation is understood and how it is measured in practice. This is why we need to understand better what is currently happening at the local level to see what works well, what doesn't, under what conditions, and what can be learned from.
So to understand this, we're working with 12 cities around the world using a transdisciplinary process with local actors to navigate MERL challenges for urban adaptation to climate change. And you may have seen around a year ago or so, we put out a call to cities, and then we've spent 6 months co-creating a work plan with the local actors. And these are the map of the cities that we are currently working on. So to delve into some of the work that we're doing in each of the cities, in Bristol, we're co-designing cool spaces or climate shelters to adapt to heat. In Malmö, we're co-producing a vision of the city adapting to heat. And in the city of Toronto, we're partnering with a community center that serves LGBTQ+ populations to integrate climate resilience into their programs. In Rosario, we're looking at the effectiveness of climate shelters. And in Santiago, we're trying to understand the social benefits of nature-based solutions in the city. And meanwhile, in the city of Santos, we're considering the role that urban permeability plays to reduce heat and flood risks. Meanwhile, in Bogota, we're reimagining the connection between the cerros and the city via creative participatory methods. And in the city of Merida in Mexico, we're collaborating around the monitoring of rain gardens. The next city, so then Algarve, we're exploring the role that green infrastructures can play and the co-benefits for social environmental they can have in a local school. And in Madrid, we're assessing the role that reclaimed water for adaptation can play. And then in Sevilla, we're supporting participatory evaluation of a neighborhood adaptation project. And then finally, in the Gold Coast, we're tracking ecological and social outcomes of the restoration of a coastal area.
Thank you, Will. In all these cities, our work is grounded in long-term place-based collaboration with local partners across different adaptation challenges, including nature-based solutions, heat, and water. Across our cities, our engagement has followed a shared approach. Sustained interaction through field visits, conversations, and spaces for collective reflection with municipalities, community organizations, and practitioners. These exchanges have helped surface local priorities, tensions, as well as lived experiences, and to create a dialogue around what adaptation success means in each place. So rather than imposing indicators or ready-made solutions or frameworks, our aim there is to build locally grounded visions of adaptation and to support ways of understanding progress that make sense for people on the ground. That means that they are responsive to local context, to everyday realities, and also to power dynamics locally.
One way we are doing this with our local partners is to apply a theory of change approach, working with cities to create a structured plan for achieving change. This approach maps out how actions lead to desired outcomes and explains the assumptions about why and how these actions will work. And in order to enrich this process, we use creative methods that invite people to imagine alternative futures, encourage creativity, and ensure that all actors, regardless of their background or their type of knowledge, can participate and share their perspectives. So, for example, we've used illustrations to spark discussion and create visual interviews where the outcome of the conversation is captured as a visual representation. We've also used interactive maps to explore interventions in specific areas and collage to allow participants to express their ideas through existing imagery.
Building on this way of working with cities, our next steps focus on learning across experiences. Moving forward, we're going to compare how different cities plan, reflect on, and act on adaptation. Not just what they do, but how they work together and make decisions. This comparison will help us identify shared challenges, differences, and lessons across contexts. At the same time, we aim to bring these local experiences into global conversations. There's strong potential for cities to learn from one another worldwide and for local on-the-ground insights to inform global adaptation debates and frameworks. Together, we hope that these activities will connect local practice and global dialogue, helping cities learn from each other while ensuring that global discussions are shaped by real-world adaptation experiences.
Through our work, new directions for future research have clearly emerged. For example, we are exploring how arts and creativity can open up imagination and dialogue, how everyday experiences shape adaptation, and how relationships and reflection influence practice. Also, we would like to further explore learning as an ongoing collective process that supports reflection and adaptation in practice. We plan to look at methods for participatory evaluation so that communities can help define what progress really means and how it can be measured. This will be taken forward through our new project called Party that has just started and will run until 2028. We also want to stay engaged in global debates on metrics and localization, while keeping climate justice and equity at the center of the evaluation conversation. If these themes resonate with you, get in touch or follow us on our website and social media.
So we are active on various social medias, in particular LinkedIn and Blue Sky. And we also send out a newsletter that we normally send out around 2 times a year. And we're also regularly updating our website. In terms of where to see us, we're planning to attend a number of different conferences in the coming year. And so far the confirmed ones are EGU in Vienna in May and Tank in Barcelona, which is also in May. And looking further ahead, in April 2027, we plan to organize an international conference here in Bilbao. So look out for more details around that. We'll be sharing them at some point soon. And we will also very likely attend Adaptation Futures in Cancun in 2027, building on last year's attendance at the conference in New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Will. So this is all that we wanted to share today. So what you see in this slide is how we started this project with a lot of excitement and passion about the work that we were planning to start, and also with a set of questions that were driving our energy, right, at the very beginning. So when I think about it now, I'm happy to see that these questions still matter. And it still makes sense. And of course, we realize that the work that we've done so far is just a tiny little bit of what's needed to really respond to these questions or what is needed to really understand how cities can adapt successfully and how we can tell if those efforts are really working. So what I feel is more important is that we see clearly now that the evaluation does matter, and evaluation can change things. But evaluation does matter as long as it is designed to help us learn and to actually act on what we learn and on what we have learned. So if we go back to the question that we used to start this conversation today, should we, and how do we imagine adaptation? So through our work, we found that first, can we imagine adaptation? Yes, of course we can. There are limits to imaginations and challenges, as we have discussed today, for evaluation. But recognizing them and acting to reduce their influence is a great way to start, both in science, in practice, and in policy. Second, should we imagine adaptation? Also, absolutely yes. Imagining adaptation together helps address justice, helps create knowledge together, helps bring in many different perspectives and values. And this is the kind of shared knowledge that is easier to use, in fact, in decision making. And we've been observing that in our experiences with local partners. And it also helps, this kind of shared collective knowledge helps us learn by opening up space for reflection and solidarity, and also awareness about the things that others are needing or others are suffering. So finally, in the third place, how do we imagine climate change adaptation in urban areas? So, well, this is the fundamental question, right? We believe that this is where we really need a real shift, but not only in science, but also in policy and in practice. And this shift means changing how we do things, making a space for creativity and being open to other ways of knowing. We know, and we've been observing, how many cities, towns, and local actors are already leading the way with these alternative approaches. They are already working in alternative spaces with alternative approaches. So we believe that it can be done, but we also know that it takes time. But what we are experiencing and what we've been told is that it's also worth it. So this is all. Thank you. And I think that for now we finished this first part of the session.